You step off a long-haul flight into JFK. It's been almost 5 months since you were last in the US. You're drained, your body clock is off, and your only goal is to get back to your apartment, your job, and your normal routine. You follow the signs to passport control like you've done before. Wait in the immigration line, and when you reach the counter, you hand the officer your green card. He scans it. The reader beeps. You expect a quick look, maybe a stamp, and to be waved through. Surprised. Instead, he stops. His face changes slightly as he studies the screen. Then he looks up and says the sentence that makes your heart sink. Please step over here for a moment. Another officer walks over with a small tablet and points toward a camera. Curious. Look straight ahead. Don't move. Keep a neutral face. A light flashes. Your picture is taken. You tell yourself it's just another security step. But behind that camera, something more is happening. That image isn't just a photo. It becomes part of a biometric profile tied to your identity, your passport or green card number, and every recorded entry and exit you've made through U.S. borders. And for permanent residents, the way this information is being used has changed quietly but significantly. The instant your green card is scanned, the system can pull up your entire travel record. Every time you left the country, every time you came back, the exact number of days you've spent outside the U.S. on each trip. This doesn't rely on faded or missing passport stamps. It comes from biometric entry-exit data that is now routinely collected at many airports. On the officer's monitor next to your name, a figure appears. Sometimes it shows 120 days abroad, sometimes 183, sometimes 210. That number represents how long you've been outside the U.S. on your latest trip. Once it crosses certain ranges, the officer's role shifts from a simple identity check to something more legal. What could have been a quick, routine admission can become a deeper review. The officer now has to think about a different question. Were you genuinely on a temporary trip, or have you, in practice, stopped living in the United States as your main home? At this stage, he doesn't need to prove anything. All he has to do is ask you questions. And the way you answer, tired, stressed, wanting to get home, can create statements that may later be treated as evidence about your intentions. A lot of green card holders think the risky part is the photo and the face scan. In reality, the key issue is what the system already knows before you say a word. Your travel timeline is already on the screen, day by day. The officer doesn't actually need to ask, "How long were you gone?" He can see that instantly. Instead, he can go straight to the more important question, why were you outside the United States for so long? How you handle the next few minutes can influence whether you walk straight out to baggage claim or are sent to secondary inspection, shown papers about possibly abandoning your green card, and suddenly find your U.S. future under review. I'm Artur, and in this video we're going to unpack what's really happening at U.S. airports under the expanded biometric entry-exit system, and why permanent residents who take long trips abroad are getting more questions than before. I'll explain 3 things in plain language: what the system does every time you travel, why long absences can trigger concern, and how to respond at the border without accidentally making your own case harder. This video is for general information only and is not legal, immigration, or financial advice. Everyone's situation is different, so please speak with a qualified professional about your particular case. To understand what's happening at the airport, you need to understand the technology behind it. For years, U.S. authorities have taken fingerprints from many travelers on arrival. That part isn't new. The big change with the expanded biometric entry-exit program is that facial recognition has become standard for almost all non-U.S. citizens: tourists, students, temporary workers, and lawful permanent residents. When you arrive, a camera captures your face. When you leave, another image is taken. Each image is run through facial recognition software and linked to that particular trip, the date, the airport, and whether it was an entry or a departure. Over time, that creates a very detailed digital record of your movements in and out of the country. Official policies often allow these records to be stored for many years. Every trip you make adds another entry to your travel history. For visitors on temporary visas, this system is used heavily to spot people who stay longer than allowed. For green card holders, the question is different. It's not usually, "Did you overstay a visa?" It's, Are you really living in the United States as your primary home, or are you mainly based somewhere else and just dropping in occasionally with a green card in your wallet? Permanent residence is built on a simple principle. The United States is supposed to be your main place of residence. The expectation is that you live primarily in the U.S. and treat travel abroad as temporary. You are absolutely allowed to leave the country. You can spend time with family overseas, handle emergencies, manage property, or visit your home country. Millions of permanent residents do this every year, but when a trip becomes very long, or when you develop a pattern of long trips, especially without planning in advance, immigration officers may start to wonder whether your real life is now centered outside the U.S. This is where the so-called 6-month rule causes confusion. Many green card holders assume there's a strict rule: spend more than 6 months outside the U.S. and you automatically lose your status. That's not how the law works. There is no magical day, like day 183, when your green card suddenly disappears. What does change after an absence of about 6 months or more is how easy it becomes for the government to question whether you've maintained residence in the U.S. A longer absence doesn't automatically cancel your status, but it makes it simpler to argue that you may have effectively moved your life elsewhere. In the past, when officers wanted to understand your travel pattern, they often had to rely on what you told them and whatever passport stamps were visible. People forgot exact dates. Stamps were missing or unclear. There was room for uncertainty. With biometric entry-exit data, most of that uncertainty is gone. When your card is scanned now, the system can show something like last departure, June 1st, current arrival, December 10th, days abroad, 192. That number comes straight from the digital record, so instead of spending time trying to work out when you left, the officer can focus immediately on why you were gone that long and whether your trip looks temporary or more like a relocation. This is exactly where many permanent residents, without realizing it, weaken their own position. They believe the safest thing is to explain everything in full detail. My mother got very sick, so I had to stay and look after her. Then there were serious issues with my business. Tickets were expensive. Then my brother needed help. I always meant to return, but problems kept coming. On a personal level, that story makes sense. But in the immigration system, officers don't type out your entire story word for word. They are trained to write short, factual notes. So your long explanation might be summarized as, traveler remained abroad to care for family member. Traveler stayed to manage business and property overseas. Those few words can later be read as evidence that your strongest ties, family and financial, are outside the U.S. Even a comment like, I didn't realize how long I'd been away, can become a note such as, traveler unaware of permanent resident residency requirements. The problem here isn't that you're telling the truth. You should always be honest with immigration officers. Giving false information can create serious legal problems. The issue is how your words are framed and recorded. Long, emotional explanations, especially when you're exhausted, often highlight everything happening in your life abroad and say relatively little about your ongoing ties to the U.S. When that's combined with a clearly documented long absence, an officer, or later an immigration judge, may decide that you effectively stopped living in the U.S., even if that was never your intention. When U.S. authorities decide whether someone has abandoned their permanent resident status, they usually don't rely on just one fact. Instead, they look at the overall picture of your life. Some of the main questions they may consider are, do you have a job or business in the United States? Did you keep a home or apartment in the U.S. while you were away? Are you filing U.S. tax returns as a resident? Is your spouse or are your children living in the U.S.? Do you maintain U.S. bank accounts, credit cards, and regular bills here? Throughout your time abroad, did you intend to return and keep the U.S. as your main home? You can see how these details can lead to very different conclusions. Imagine two people who each spent 7 months outside the U.S. Person A stayed abroad to care for a sick parent, but kept their job in the U.S., kept paying rent on their U.S. apartment, and filed their U.S. tax return as a resident. Person B spent the same 7 months abroad, closed their U.S. bank accounts, ended their lease, and accepted full-time work in another country. Both were gone for 7 months, but the full picture those facts create is completely different. The difficulty is that the airport is not a courtroom. You don't have hours to explain your life, show documents, and have a lawyer speak for you. You have a short conversation, often after an overnight flight, with an officer who has to make a relatively quick decision. That's why many immigration lawyers suggest a very simple approach for green card holders returning from long trips. Stay calm, be truthful, answer only what you're asked, and keep your answers focused on the fact that your real home is still in the United States. Think of it as careful, intentional communication. If the officer asks, "Why were you gone for 6 months and 2 weeks?" a focused answer could be, "I was visiting family and taking care of personal matters, but my home and main life are in the United States, and I always intended to return." You've told the truth. You haven't turned it into a long speech, and you've clearly stated the key point. Your primary residence is in the U.S., and the trip was temporary. If the officer then asks, "What ties do you have in the U.S.?" that's your chance to list them briefly and specifically: your job, your apartment or house, your spouse or children, your regular bills, your tax filings, and any other ongoing commitments. You don't need to argue. You don't need to share every emotional detail of what happened abroad. Just calmly list the concrete facts that show your life is centered here. Short, factual answers both cooperate with the process and keep attention on what matters legally: your residence in the United States. Even if you handle the initial questions well, the officer may still send you to secondary inspection. You'll be directed to another area, asked to sit, and your case will be reviewed in more detail. This can feel intimidating, but going to secondary inspection by itself does not mean you're losing your green card. It usually means the officer wants more time, more information, or input from a colleague before making a decision. In secondary, you may be asked more detailed questions about your trip, your work, your address, your family. The officer may be typing while you speak. This is often when travelers become very anxious and just want things to end quickly. In that state, some people will say almost anything or sign documents they haven't fully read, just to get out of the room or even to get back on a plane. One of the most serious documents that can appear in this situation is a form where you say you are voluntarily giving up your permanent resident status. In practice, signing that form is the same as agreeing to surrender your green card. Many people who sign such a form later say they didn't realize that's what they were doing. They were stressed and just wanted the situation to be over. Immigration attorneys are generally very clear about this. Do not sign any document giving up your permanent residence unless you genuinely intend to abandon your status and fully understand the consequences. If an officer suggests that you sign something like that and you want to keep your green card, you can respond calmly with something like, "I do not wish to abandon my permanent resident status. I would like to speak with an immigration attorney or have this reviewed by an immigration judge." You are not refusing inspection. You are asking for your right to have a serious question about your status decided through the proper legal process. As a green card holder, you often have the right to have disputes about whether you abandoned your residence reviewed in immigration court instead of being decided only at the airport. In court, a judge can look at the full picture: your biometric travel record, your employment, tax filings, housing, family situation, and any documents that show your main life remained in the U.S. In many cases, people who faced tough questioning at the border were later able to show in court that they had not abandoned their residence because their ties to the U.S. stayed strong and their long trip was still temporary in nature. That system exists because the law recognizes that life is complicated. A single long trip should not automatically erase years of residence unless the broader facts clearly show that you have moved your life elsewhere. Hearing all this, you might think, maybe the safest approach is to never leave the U.S., but for most people, that's not realistic. Parents and grandparents age and may need care. Relatives get sick. Important life events, weddings, births, funerals, happen overseas. Businesses and properties abroad sometimes require in-person attention. Emergencies rarely fit neatly into immigration timelines. For many permanent residents, international travel isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. The goal is not to trap you in the United States. The goal is to help you travel in a way that's informed and thoughtful, understanding what the system sees and how your choices may be interpreted. If you know in advance that you may need to stay outside the U.S. for a long time, many months or close to a year or more, there are tools that may help manage the risk. One of the most important is a reentry permit. This is a travel document you apply for while you're physically in the U.S. before you leave. It doesn't give you unlimited freedom to remain abroad forever, but it does show that you notified the U.S. government in advance that you expected a long trip and that you intended to keep your U.S. residence. When you return and present a valid reentry permit along with your green card, officers often view your situation differently from someone who comes back after a long absence with no prior preparation. Beyond formal documents, your everyday choices matter a lot. If you expect to be gone for several months, ask yourself, can I keep my apartment or home in the U.S. during this time? Can I maintain my job or at least a clear relationship with a U.S. employer? Am I continuing to file U.S. tax returns as a resident? Are my main bank accounts, driver's license, and mailing address still in the United States? These are exactly the kinds of facts officers and judges look at when they decide where your real home is. If your plans change while you're abroad, for example, a planned 2-month stay turns into 8 months, it's often a good idea to speak with an immigration attorney before you travel back to the U.S. Even a short consultation can help you understand how your particular situation may be viewed, what documents to bring, and how to explain your circumstances clearly and accurately at the border. Preparing before you stand at the inspection counter is almost always easier than trying to repair a problem after it has already started. Stepping back, the biometric entry-exit system is part of a broader change in how borders work. For decades, border control relied mainly on paper documents, passports, stamps, and quick questions. Now it relies more and more on digital data, facial recognition, electronic travel histories, and connected databases. From the government's perspective, this can make things more efficient and reduce guesswork. There's less uncertainty about where you've been and for how long. From a traveler's perspective, it means your travel patterns are visible in a way they never were before. Long absences stand out immediately. Repeated extended trips can start to look like a lifestyle pattern rather than one-off exceptions. That doesn't mean green card holders are being banned from traveling, but it does mean that old assumptions like, my green card protects me no matter how long I'm gone, or if I tell a long emotional story they'll understand, are now much less reliable. The system already knows how long you were away. Officers are trained to look for signs that someone may have shifted their primary residence outside the U.S. Your job is to arrive prepared, with your facts, your ties, and your communication under control. So let's go back to that moment at JFK. You've just landed. You're exhausted. Your green card is scanned. The camera flashes. Somewhere in a database, your last departure is matched with today's arrival, and a number appears showing exactly how many days you've been gone. An alert may pop up because your absence passed the 6-month mark. The officer looks up and asks, "Why were you outside the United States for so long?" If you knew none of this, that question might feel like a sudden trap. You might panic, talk too much, sign something you don't fully read, or leave the airport with a problem that could have been avoided. If you understand how the system works, that same moment becomes much more manageable. You know the officer already has your travel timeline. You know that long absences lead to questions about residence, not instant cancellation. You know that the law looks at the full picture of your life, and you know that your best protection is to answer calmly, truthfully, and briefly, while clearly emphasizing the reality that matters most. Your home, your work, your family, your daily life are in the United States, and your time abroad was temporary. Knowledge doesn't remove every risk, but it changes your position completely. Instead of approaching the counter in the dark, you walk up already aware of what's on the screen and how your words may be written down. In a world where immigration systems are becoming increasingly automated and data-driven, that kind of preparation is one of the most powerful tools you can have. If you know other green card holders who travel frequently or are planning long trips for family or work reasons, consider sharing this information with them before they fly. Many people only learn about these issues after they've already been flagged, and by then, the situation can be much harder to fix. Staying informed, planning ahead, and understanding your rights can help protect not just a single trip, but your long-term ability to live and build a future in the United States. I'm Artur, and I'll see you in the next video. You in